Hi guys! In this video I'm going to be making a quilt label for my quilts. So how do I make my own quilt labels? I have left this little section unquilted here so I can put that quilt label on. So you want to leave a little bit bare at the back so you can attach that quilt label. So a little bit later we'll go over what should be on a quilt label. So let's get started here. When I'm making a quilt label for my quilt, sometimes I'll use the same colour as the backing of the quilt. This time I'm going to be making my quilt label with white fabric. Now I am going to attach to the back of my quilt label a little bit of stabiliser. This will help when I come to sew my lettering onto my quilt label with my sewing machine. So there you go, it just gives it a little bit more stability onto that label there. And I don't want my quilt label to exceed what I have here, so I'm going to cut it to size. So I'm just going to do this freehand right now, and I'm just going to leave a little bit extra so I can then fold the seams back. Here we go, we're just going to cut some of this away. So I will be folding some of these back here to hide the raw seam, so I need to remember that when I'm creating this quilt label. So let's head over to the sewing machine. This is the Baby Lock Soprano, and we are going to be making a quilt label for my quilts on the Baby Lock Soprano today. I am going to thread this machine up with a high contrasting colour because I don't want it to be white on white, because our quilt label is white. So I think I'm going to go with like a pink or a teal. I might do a teal colour thread for this quilt label because I think it's going to pop. The text is going to definitely pop on the quilt label. When you purchase the Baby Lock Soprano, it obviously comes with its set of instructions, so don't lose these guys. And also, this is your quick reference guide, and it's going to tell you exactly what number of each of the letters are. So you definitely need this handy. And also, you can't change the sizing of these letterings. I always get this comment whenever I do this sort of video. You can't change the size. This is not an embroidery machine, this is a sewing machine. So any of the lettering that is preset, they are preset. Literally what you see is what you get with them. So I want to select, I don't kind of want this kind of like cursive writing look here, and there's kind of like a blocky kind of look here. I think I'm just going to go with this like regular lettering here for my quilt label. First of all, we do have to change this foot. We have to change it to the end foot because that's the decorative stitching foot. So any decorative stitching work that you do, you'll have to change it over to that different end foot. Here we go, we've got a really cool coloured teal here. So let's get started on doing that quilt label. So what should be on a quilt label? What should be on the quilt label is the name of the quilt, generally the reason it's made, but I'm not going to do that, the quilter's name and the date. Let's just say that we call this stars. So I have pressed this A button here, so it automatically knows that anything that I'm going to do from here is going to be the characters. So I'm going to call up the capital letter S, which is, on my machine it's 19. Then it's going to do the S, and I'm going to do a lowercase. I'm going to do a lowercase is a T, which is 46. And then I'm going to do an A, which is lowercase, and it's 27. And then I'm going to do an R, so that is 44. And then I'm going to do an S, which is 45. And then if at this point you wanted to do a space, you would do 101. You'd have to do like a dash at the bottom. So this is my first one. So I am going to stitch this one out. You don't want to hold on to it, just let it do its thing. We have these things called jump stitches, and we don't want to see that on our quilt label, so we're just going to cut them away. And we're just going to get any ones that are could just take them jump stitches away from our quilt label, because we want it to look pretty. And I'm going to do my next line. I'm going to clear everything out that I did for the last thing. And I'm going to start writing my name. So you have to keep referencing the instruction manual for your Baby Lock Soprano or whatever machine you are using to get the words up, the letters up for your quilt label. And if you want to do that space, it's 101. And then you would continue on and do the second part of your name. Then I want an A. See how easy this is to create your own quilt label? So you don't actually need to have a embroidery machine. You can do it straight off your sewing machine, especially if you are watching me and you are a Baby Lock Soprano user. Okay, and there we go, we're ready to go again. I'm going to kind of offset things, so let's get going here. So I've now put the date on and I'm now going to stitch this out again onto the quilt label. So as you can see, this is a really quick way of creating your quilt labels. So let's now go through the method of actually attaching your quilt labels to your quilt, and it's really not that difficult. I'm just going to fold that back because we want to hide the raw seams. We don't want the raw seams showing on your quilts. Just fold back all the sections here. And I like to use quite an interesting stitch to attach this to the back of the quilt, and I'll show you that when we get back to the sewing machine in a second. So once we have all these raw seams to the back, and by the way, this is a series of videos, so you're going to want to watch the very first one that I did of this making. So this whole series is making a quilt from start to finish. So I have shown you the whole process to make this quilt. So if you haven't seen the very first video, you are going to want to watch that very first video. Okay, so it's extremely rare that I'm pinning something into place, but this is a quilt label and I want it to be like, you know, straight and everything. So I don't want it to move on me, so I have put pins into the quilt label. Also, I am using the batting of the quilt as a stabilizer to attach the quilt label to the quilt backing. So that's another tip. And I've also selected a blanket stitch that's going to attach this quilt label onto the quilt backing. So you enjoying watching me making a quilt label for my quilt? Let me know in that comment box down below. And here we go, here's the quilt label all stitched on. It really wasn't that difficult. It came up really quickly and there's no excuse now not to have a quilt label on your quilts. You are going to want to watch this next video that is showing up on your screen because it's going to show you exactly how to make this quilt from start to finish. Now I've shown you making a quilt for my quilt. How do you make a quilt label for your quilt? Hit that subscribe so you don't miss my next video because we're going to be binding this beast. Leave me a comment down below and don't forget to hit that like. Thank you so much for watching. Bye guys.